Running a small business means I wear lots of hats. When I put on my hiring hat, I can count on LinkedIn Hiring Pro to make it easy. LinkedIn Hiring Pro helps manage my hiring workflow, puts my job post in front of a unique network of professionals, and matches me with the best candidates for my business. I can also share my job with my network. No other job site lets me do that. No wonder most small businesses say they'd use LinkedIn Hiring Pro again. Hire right the first time. Post your job for free on LinkedIn today at linkedin.com/quality.
This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
Hey everyone, welcome to Immigrantly. I am Sadia Khan and you're joining me for an incredible conversation on a podcast that is reclaiming immigrant identity in the most human, messy, and unapologetic way. "400 episodes ago, I sat down with my very first guest. I recorded that conversation on my phone. No regard for acoustics, no pop filter, no clue what I was doing. I said, yeah, so often it could have been its own drinking game. I have grown since then. And so, it turns out has she. My guest today is Sahar Saleem. And this is a homecoming in more ways than one. When we first spoke, Sahar was a creative strategy and cultural marketing leader at PepsiCo, climbing the ranks until she finally landed what she thought was her dream job. And that's when she realized the view from the top wasn't the one she wanted. What she was craving couldn't be found inside corporate interest. It lived in story and in the societal impact stories can have. So she left. She moved to LA to write full-time. And 1 month later, the writers' strike hit. A few months after that came October 7th, and with it, the swift, quiet blacklisting of pro-Palestinian voices in Hollywood. Another industry making its values unmistakably clear, throwing new obstacles onto an already punishing road for a first-time screenwriter trying to break in. Now, Sahar's scripts live in a genre I can only describe as sci-fi fictions of the interior life, memory, spirituality, intergenerational trauma, social justice. Her most recent pilot, Cash, follows a Pakistani American memory archeologist, I'll ask Sahar what that means, who helps her father excavate and reframe repressed memories after displacement to extend his lifespan. And as she circulated that script against the backdrop of the genocide in Palestine, she kept asking herself a question. What's the real-world equivalent of this? The answer took her somewhere unexpected, to somatic healing and epigenetics, the emerging science of how trauma may be passed down in the body. She began training in somatic therapy and integral coaching and went on to launch Soma Sahar, a healing practice weaving somatic embodiment, ancestral reflection, creative ritual, and contemplative inquiry. It's basically built for people who know why they're struggling and are still struggling. To some, it might look like a detour. To Sahar, It's an inevitable homecoming, a first generation immigrant, or I would like to call her 1.5 generation immigrant, learning what it feels like to exhale generations of survival and to step breath by breath into a life more expansive than her lineage ever had room to imagine. So without further ado, let's welcome Sahar back to Immigrantly. It's been a minute. Oh my God. Like, I have been thinking about this interview a lot lately, Sahar, and there's so many different reasons for it. You were my first guest. We are doing all, the sound check, the mic check right now. And I remember my first interview with you. First of all, I did not give a fuck about the acoustics at the time, which as a podcaster, it just makes me so sad as to what I was thinking. I just had the conviction and nothing beyond that. So it was my first episode, but at the same time, you were doing something so different, right? You were working at Pepsi, you had your dream job. I don't know if you've ever gone back and listened to that first episode, but when you look back, what does that woman not know yet about herself?
Well, first off, I'm thinking about how you started, which was your first podcast. I'm like, look at how much you've done. Both of us have probably done in those, 4 years, 5 years, I think it was. Maybe longer than that, actually.
It's been 6, almost 7.
I was going to say, I quit my job 4 years ago. So it was before, I remember it was before I actually made the leap. So it was like even earlier than that. Oh my God, there's so much I didn't know. I had so much fear. I was so afraid. I had a lot of conviction. I think that's where maybe we connect, is like, I knew that I had this purpose. I knew that I had a really clear sense of what I wanted to do, but the idea of doing it was just so terrifying to me because I had like the golden handcuffs. I had this dream job. I had just like such a comfortable, materially comfortable life, even though I knew something was missing. Since we've spoken, I quit my job to pursue screenwriting full time without a clear opportunity in hand to be like, okay, this is going to work. It was very much like, let me just pursue this. And then I moved to LA a month before the writer's strike hit. I remember that we had a strike ending party and the next day was October 7th. So there was just this such a massive shift that was happening emotionally, collectively in so many ways. Just even when I think about that period of time, it was like so hard, but so collectively sad. And still, I know it's continuing. And then even the work I was doing then really informed the work that I'm doing now and almost solidified my purpose.
We will get to that, but I do want to deconstruct what you've said because you've said so many different things. You said you were scared. When I interviewed you almost 7 years ago, you did not come across as someone who was scared. And what's interesting to me is when you talk about your job, you still call it a dream job. But what I am hearing, it was a dream job for somebody else. It was a dream job outwardly, yes, but internally you were struggling. Sahar, what were you struggling with and what were you really scared of at the time?
I think deep down, it was a question around values and purpose. The dream job was a dream job because I knew I wanted to do something creative and I knew I wanted steady income. Those were like two foundational things that I was like, how can I have both of these things? But I think I got to a point where working for a massive corporate entity is never going to be able to do both of those things for me. So I decided to pursue the creative side of it, which was the screenwriting. But even when I was quitting my job, so I've been in therapy for the past 9 years, but I started seeing a coach. We call him an integral coach or a somatic. He had some somatic parts to the work that he was doing. And so much of the work I was doing with him was actually addressing that fear and addressing exactly this question that you're bringing to me of like, well, this is a dream job, but is it really your dream job? And you want to leave, but you're still applying to jobs that are going to take you there, which are to LA specifically, that are still going to be fitting into that mold of what you think a dream job is. But what are you afraid of in the sense of why can't you just jump? And he never said any of this overtly. It was really the underlying, pinnings of the work we had was. And then there were a series of things that happened that also had to make me face how afraid I was. Because I think I'm somebody who doesn't like to acknowledge it. I think I have a very strong front, but I have these like deep-seated fears because of the way that I was raised and the realities of the world. Like as much as I don't want to care, those are always going to be there.
But as you're describing where you were and what you were feeling, I keep coming back to, and this may also be because I know you personally, I know your family, and I keep thinking, and this is something that my husband or probably your dad would say. So I'm going to be devil's advocate here and say that leap of faith that you took, that chance that you took, it wasn't as big because you had some financial cushion, right? Because of your savings and your parents. Do you think people who make it work eventually in the corporate sector are the ones who cannot afford otherwise? And you were one of the privileged ones who has the means, the resources, and the bandwidth to take that risk. Have you ever sat with your privilege through all of this?
Oh, 100%. I think the privilege is almost foundational to it. I think even in doing this type of work, so much of it is coming into it and understanding the different layers of my privilege. So when I quit Pepsi, I had quite a bit of savings that got me to not having to do any work for 2 years. Granted, I'm very frugal, very sensitive about how much money I spend, not in the sense of like I limit myself too much, but I know exactly how much I spend every month. So I had planned it in that similar way, with the immigrant mindset of like, okay, I have this much money, I have this much time to do what I need to do. But through the process, when I quit my job, I not only left the work, but I feel like I shifted into an entirely new identity. So I was in a predominantly white environment. Most of my friends were white, and it was something I actually took a lot of pride in. I was like, I moved here, and it is such a testament of like where I grew up, like in Scarsdale, which was so white. I moved to the States when I was 8. So even the experience that I had within assimilation, there was like an entire deconditioning that was happening as I left Pepsi, where I was like, why have I felt so lonely? I've always had like friends. I've always been very social. I've always had this like, community, even at work. I've been celebrated at work, but I felt like an immense isolation. And that's also why I was in therapy for so long. I think there were so many layers of things that I was working on. It's like, I have everything, but I feel so lonely. And when I shifted, I was back and forth between New York and LA for a while because I wanted to build the right community for myself before I fully landed here. So there were a lot of things I did in a very safe way. I was like, how do I make sure I'm comfortable before I actually make the leap? So when I was in the process of moving to LA, because it was a process, my entire community shifted. So I was mostly around Black and brown folks. Most people were queer. And I went from being in a room of probably like the most marginalized identity of like the only brown woman in a space of majority white people, white men. But we had a lot of white women at Pepsi too. And we also had a lot of Black women. I would say those were my mentors for the most part throughout my Pepsi experience, who were honestly like the awakeners for a lot of my own privilege and my own denial, I would say. There was something about moving from those spaces to then being around like trans folks, like Black trans folks, and then being like, oh, I feel like a complete imposter here. And so there was like an adjustment around not only like race, gender, but also socioeconomic privilege of being so hyper conscious that I grew up in such a different world than most people in the world, I would say. So it forced me in a lot of ways to walk into rooms being like, I really don't know that much. Like I know a lot, but I'm very intellectualized in the way I talk about it. So how do I now step back and really start understanding these other, not even understanding, but like connecting with people in a way that's beyond understanding?
What was one thing that stood out to you about you?
I don't know if there's one specific thing. I think it was such a deconstruction of like my entire sense of self. Maybe the one thing that I did come to was like a returning to a younger version of myself.
A younger version.
In a way that I think is quite liberating. Like, I think kids are the most enlightened. We come into the world pure, like humble and curious. Like, it's just, we just don't know anything and we're just excited to learn about it. There's just like an expansiveness and an openness. And it's through these like barriers and generational conditioning and societal conditioning, these systems kind of telling us what we should be doing, that then starts putting these layers on top of us that kind of removes us from ourselves. And there's something about that like younger version of myself that I feel so connected to, because I do remember feeling so curious, so liberated, so connected to the world around me. And then all of a sudden there were all these shoulds of like, you should be doing this and you should have this and this is what you should. And I was like, shoulds to me are such, even when I'm working with clients, like such a sign of an inner critic of like, whose voice is this? Because this isn't my voice. And so much of growing up from the way I've experienced it is starting to detangle those voices from who my actual self is. And I think even now I have like a nephew and a niece, and my nephew's 4 now, so he's fully talking. And when I'm with him, I'm like, oh my God, this is the freest version of being human. And there's so much protectiveness. I'm sure you feel this as a mom, where I'm like, oh, I want to protect it. But I also am like, oh, I need you have to go through the things you go through in life, whether or not I want you to go through them.
Frizz, breakage, or split ends? Meet your match. The K18 Molecular Repair Hair Mask delivers real, lasting repair. Its patented K18 peptide reverses damage on the molecular level, leaving hair soft, strong, and bouncy in just 4 minutes. So that damage that's been stressing you out, you'll see it disappear after just 1 use of the mask. Shop at Sephora or get 10% off your first purchase with code SPOTIFY at k18hair.com.
Sahar, let's go back to when you moved to LA. It was a different kind of crowd. You were discovering yourself, maybe rediscovering in some ways. You felt more liberated, more connected with your younger version, which again means more unencumbered by societal pressures and norms. But at the same time, you were also pivoting in your profession, right? You were a writer at the time. You had become a writer. And I don't even know if this classification does justice, because how do you become a writer? You're probably always a writer. You probably had that creative streak in you. And it just amplified through that process. But then there was so much happening outside in external environment, right? Writers' strike, you talked about that. But then this quiet alienation of younger writers, of pro-Palestinian writers at the same time, while you're trying to find footing in that industry. That must have been so tough for you. How did you plow through? How did you make it work? Or did you?
Did you is a good question. Like the first 6 months of living in LA before, I think October 7th and the Palestinian genocide were massively destructive, I think, in so many ways, in every way you could possibly think about it. Like when I first moved here, the strike didn't feel as bad, because to me, I was like, I just moved here now. I have almost a soft landing pad of let me just meet people and start connecting with people and just being fearlessly like myself in the way that I'm talking about my projects. And I was so excited. Like there's so much novelty in it. I think there were dips too, because then I was also seeing my bank account going down. There was that piece of like, okay, well, how am I going to make this work? And how long can I go about it like this?
Was there a sense of urgency connected to that? Like, were you thinking, okay, I am running out of time. I need to make this work again. I should make this work. I need to make this work because I've taken this leap of faith. My parents may not be fully on board, or maybe they were. I'm making that assumption. But was the financial part creating a sense of urgency for you at the same time?
It almost felt like if I thought about it too much, it put me into a paralysis. So there was a lot around building community that helps in that process, because now I was around people who had been artists forever, and some of whom who had no support, who had no kind of backup plan, couldn't even move into their parents' house if they needed to. And then I had other friends who had like an unlimited well of like they could do whatever they wanted. I always felt like I was very much in the middle of like there was never a place where like I could be fully dependent, and there was never a place where I would have absolutely nothing. I was very much in the center. And there were a lot of conversations, very difficult conversations I had with friends about even the way that I talked about money or like the way that I would stress about it when I had friends who were on the other extreme. So when we talk about privilege, to me, I think it's such an important thing, and it's not something I shy away from. It's like anytime we had those conversations, it would deepen our relationship because it helps you understand just like the breadth, also the assumptions and the expectations everybody has around money, and how much money specifically, our relationship with it is like a psychology of our generations, the generations before us. So people who have a lot might act like they have none. People who have none might act like they have a lot. Like there's so much around that concept that I actually think is so meaty. So I think it's really, through personal experience, has been actually very developmental or has helped me grow a lot in having those conversations. So in the beginning, I felt a lot of pressure, and I felt it was interesting because I had another career. It was much more around, okay, I was almost like, oh, maybe I need to get a marketing job. Maybe I need to do this, or maybe I need to get more freelance work, rather than a push on the creative, because I didn't want to sacrifice anything with the creative work. I think there was like a stubbornness with the creative work of like, I just went through this entire career and I had to live among these values and I had to censor myself in all of these ways that if I'm in this industry, I don't want to do that. And I think there is this like, obviously reality of the fact that to me now, Hollywood feels like a advertising machine as well. It doesn't feel that different.
It does. Absolutely. I think if anything, Palestinian genocide has uncovered the ugly reality, the ugly truths of Hollywood that maybe people like you and I weren't aware of. But it's interesting what you're saying. On the one hand, you want to be fully immersed in this creative process. And at the same time, it's pulling you in this other direction of where you're like, okay, sustainability may come from my other career so that I can focus on the creative side. So there is this contradiction happening. Did you ever feel guilty about it?
Oh, 100%. I don't think it was that I had the backup plan that I felt guilty about. I think it was more about, again, from a value standpoint, even if I went into the advertising route, I'd have to work with somebody who was potentially a Zionist organization, and I ended up actually working for one of those, which I like to think that I was doing my own form of activism. There was so much, I think, after, like the Palestine, it's been happening for the last 75 years with the occupation of Palestine, but with the genocide in particular, there was something, even now when I'm thinking about it and I actually I get blacked out, like it literally goes blank when I think about that period. It was such a specific experience, but such a collective experience. And so much of what I was working through, and even what I work with clients now, is this idea of how systems of oppression impact us personally. I actually have this book next to me, but his name's Frantz Fanon. I don't know if you've heard of this book, but he studied medicine and psychiatry. He's part of the Black liberation movement. And the foundation of his work is around this idea of, in order to decolonize the world and to move towards a more decolonized world, you have to work on decolonizing your own mind and working through.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. 100%. And that's the toughest part, because we don't consciously see ourselves as colonized, especially, again, going back to where we come from, our education, our socioeconomic background. There are so many different parameters that we've set for ourselves that somehow indicate that we are fully in charge of who we are, but not really. But this is so fascinating. Let's go back to, so you were writing, trying to find a job to sustain yourself. It seems like you did end up working somewhere, as you mentioned. How long did you work there for?
Yeah, I had actually a couple of jobs. I was working on some short films, so I had some writing jobs. But then the thing that was really giving me the money was, and I won't go too specific into the details of the company and who's running it, as I can tell you broadly, but it was an AI therapy startup. And I was on my last leg financially. Like I really had no money, and I was really burnt, not, I think emotionally, I just did not know what to do. I was at this point of paralysis of there's no right solution. And then I ended up jumping into this thing, which I was like, okay, this is going to give me something, but I think there's going to be more that I'm learning than anything else. Cause I didn't buy into the product. I'm not very, I mean, not only from the people who are leading it, but also like the product itself, I think I felt really disconnected from, because it was a therapy startup that was focused on CBT as like the main form of therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for those who don't know. And it's very intellectually minded. And the type of therapy, as I'm sure we'll get into, that I'm very focused on, or the type of coaching that I do, is about somatics. So it's much more about the body than it is about the mind. And CBT is literally, I think it's effective. It's good for like almost like an introduction into therapy, or for specific things. I think it's good to use all modalities, but to have a platform that is only focused on that felt like this complete reflection of like the West's perspective of what therapy is supposed to be like. I'm trying to think of it because I don't focus on CBT, but the idea is essentially there's like a triangle, and I'm trying to remember what's in the triangle. I think it's like thoughts, feelings, and actions is how it works. And so the idea is to map out when you have like a thought, feeling, and the action that goes with it, or the behavior that goes with it. It's very linear. It's good. Again, like I think there's so many modalities that, like, I'm thinking more about DBT. There's like a couple, I don't know if you know what DBT is, dialectical behavioral therapy, that are really good for like addiction. So like CBT, I think if you're like really in a depressive place, there's a use for everything. But I think to have one modality be the foundation of the offering that you're giving, and then have it be so informed by AI, it's like the opposite of where I think the world is going. And then on top of it, again, the people being Zionists really added the layer of that. So I kind of went into it being like, how do I basically cash out without really helping that much? Because I don't, because I don't believe
I like
in
that
it.
approach. I really like that approach.
So it was my own form of activism, where I was like, let me just pretend I'm really bad at my job. But to me, it was really insightful in the fact that I felt the same way about Pepsi, where it puts me into the mind of the people who are actually at the forefront of creating these like new technologies or these changes. Like I would say Pepsi, and the way that Pepsi operated, was like a microcosm of American society. Like the short-term gains versus long-term gains, the narcissism and leadership, the way that you get a promotion, and like the politics that go into it. Like everything about that really set me up for Hollywood. It set me up for like how to exist within this world, and also helped me obviously relate to clients in a different way, because you understand the systems on two levels. Yeah. And I felt very similar to this with the rise of AI and the archetype of the type of people who are leading this movement. It's how much they think they know and how removed they are from the actual people who they're trying to help. And I think that, and that's how I, honestly, there were a lot of moments at Pepsi where I felt this too, because we were so much about like grounding in the consumer and really understanding the user. And you see in real time how people are used as like metadata and like statistics, and like trying to test messaging through like paid ads, where I'm like, that's not going to get you anywhere. Who's clicking on these, you know, at the end of the day? So there was something about it that was kind of like this final straw of like, I felt so terrible the entire time I was working for that company. I mean, I also put it on myself where I was like, this is the only option I have right now. But there was so much guilt, and there was so much in that guilt that I had to then face within myself of like, okay, where is this guilt coming from? Where does it live in my body? What is it connected to? How do I use this as a lesson? How do I move this into what I'm really doing, which is so informed by the ideas of displacement, with everything happening with the genocide. The reason why I am obsessed with why I wanted to be a practitioner, why all my scripts are around intergenerational trauma, is to understand how do you help the people who are going through the worst of the worst in a way that keeps them human.
So it basically was one of the many triggers that led you to somatic healing, right? How do you describe the person who subscribes to that healing methodology? That's who you were before you went into training. The term intergenerational trauma, it's a heavy word. For immigrants like me and probably your mom and others, it just puts so much onus on us to show up a certain way, or to understand this mindset of there has been something in our past, something generationally that wasn't right. And you know this, we are not supposed to question a lot that happens generationally among elders, amongst ourselves. Do you think the word trauma is the right word for what you are working on or what you're processing through?
What would you say is your definition of trauma?
When I think of trauma, I think of something that's seismic in nature, almost destructive. Does that make sense?
I think a lot of people see trauma as that definition. What I believe trauma is, and through the context of, especially when you're working in somatics and when you're working, I think in regular psychotherapy as well, is that trauma is your body's reaction to something, is your body's reaction to an event that we then call a traumatic event. But it's actually more about the body than it is about the event itself. So that's why when you think about how somebody might say something was traumatic, they're actually explaining what's physically happening to them. So it might seem small to somebody else, but it's igniting something physically in them that feels, use your word, seismic, that feels very big and very disrupting.
But does it equate to intensity spectrum? Like trauma itself is supposed to be intense, right? What if we don't see our generational passing as intense or, as I said, seismic? I think that's where the disconnect happens for me. I think the word trauma itself is, in a way, off-putting for me. I wish there were a better word that could really reel me in and say, hey, it's not like it's traumatic or intense or destructive. It's something, as you said, that your body experiences and your body's reaction to it. So it may not be as intense. It's on a spectrum. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The question I would ask, and this is actually something that I would do in session too, is understanding the relationship with the word of trauma and why it feels so big. Because I do think that is a part of the reason why it's so hard to use, is there's like a resistance to the word itself. And to me, it takes me to this idea, because we're not in session, like it takes me to this idea of the way that generations have minimized their own pain as a mode of survival. I think so much of it is like, well, the things I went through weren't hard. That's just how life was then. There's a complete minimization of it, which actually doesn't let us feel the extent of it. And that is where, to me, the generational thing piles up. So have you heard of epigenetics?
Yeah, I have. I've heard of it. I don't know much about it though.
So epigenetics is similar to, basic genetics, where we were taught that things that are acquired through a lifetime are not passed down, but that's actually now not true. That has been disproven, where epigenetics is the idea that trauma is actually passed down in the body. So one of the kind of clearest examples that people use is this idea of when the woman is pregnant with a daughter, they actually have every generation that's going to come in the womb of the daughter, because every girl is born with the same amount of eggs that she's kind of shedding throughout her lifetime. So when my great 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 grandmother had probably my eggs in her womb because of that transference. So it's the idea that every body actually holds the bodies of the future, which is why the healing that we do in this lifetime actually impacts the generations to come, both in a pattern, like in an actual nurture way, but also in a nature way. There's a connection there.
That's so fascinating. It really puts things in perspective, right? Because now I can connect the physical self to what's happened or what will happen and how it will impact the future generations. So now that we are already discussing this, let's go to somatic healing. Let's talk about that. So you're writing your scripts, you've given up on this crazy Zionist job. Where does somatic healing come into all of this?
It was started with what you were sharing, which was like being on the other side of being in the chair, which I would call them clients. Some people call them patients. But I had started therapy in 2018 or 2019 on my own.
And this is not somatic healing,
This wasn't
right?
somatic. This was traditional talk therapy, which I found profoundly helpful. I really believe in it holistically. I think there's such, as somebody who has benefited from therapy, there's such like a profound purpose and need.
I have a therapist, and I think I was like, I missed a couple of sessions recently, and I'm missing her now. I'm like, I need to go and talk to her about a few things.
Yeah, no, it's the best. As somebody who also is still very actively in therapy, I'm like, I love her down. She's like my favorite person. So I think there is a purpose. And then somatics and coaching, I think it comes in almost moments where I feel like I had gotten to a point where I'd built so much self-awareness and I could talk about my problems so clearly and I understood everything like so well. And my therapist at that moment had asked me, she goes, Sahar, you have such a robust vocabulary and you're so good at like explaining things, but are you actually feeling anything? Like, are you actually feeling what you're saying?
Huh.
And I had the same reaction. I was very much like, I think so. Like I cry all the time. Like that must be it. Like that must be what feeling is. And I think that moment still really stands with me, but it wasn't until maybe like 5 or 6 years later that I started doing somatic therapy. And with somatic, so much of it is like reacquainting yourself to your body in a way that language actually escapes you. And there's something that's really scary about that because we use language as protection, but there is something in this kind of like disillusion of self, like the dissolving of self that happens when you really are like, there's something happening in my body and I don't actually even want to give it words because I need to just move through it. And to give it words is sometimes it gets to an extreme. I think words are very helpful and I think the mind is very important. But there is a point where it can become like begging. It's like begging for people to see you. There is like intellectualization itself is a form of protection. Because if I explain it the right way, if I can position myself the right way, I'm safe. And so a lot of my work is to kind of, how do we see what's underneath that? What are you trying to protect yourself from with it? Not to get rid of it.
What is the physical manifestation of releasing trauma through your body? What does that look like?
I feel like it's so different for everyone. I think I can talk about my own experience as I went through it. I'm like, I don't even know where to start. It's very slow. I would say it takes time because even when I'm working with clients, there's a reason why, for the most part, I have 12-week minimums because so many of us have actually been conditioned or have learned to feel so unsafe in our body. So we know that we're having sensations like, oh, my stomach hurts all day, or I have chronic pain, or, I've had this pain in my right hip for so long. All of these things actually have an emotional root. Like they're connected to some kind of emotion in some way. And so I think I'm trying to go back in time. My first experience, I guess, with a person who was more somatically inclined was with the coach that I'd seen before I quit my job. And a lot of what we did was we used internal family systems, which is another modality I use. He actually inspired a lot of the work that I do now. But it was almost like basically guiding me through meditation. It was like a breath work, which again is something I do with my clients. Like in the middle of a story, when there's an emotional point, a lot of times the therapist will ask, okay, that thing made you emotional. What was it that made you emotional? What I would do in session is I actually will be like, oh, okay, it seems like something's coming up. Let's do an inquiry into it. And then I guide them into closing their eyes and really going into questioning the sensation before building a story around it. So it might be, I'm trying to think of a specific example.
Like, where do you feel it in your body?
Mm-hmm. It would start with where do you feel it in your body? Then I would explain, like, I'll think about, let's see if I can I don't know if you want to do a scan right now too.
Yeah.
So if you close your eyes, you take a couple of deep breaths. Just notice how your breath naturally wants to move. And as you acquaint yourself with the different parts of your body, is there any sensation that's present right now?
I feel a little dizzy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And for listeners, I have my eyes closed. I took 2 deep breaths, and now it's almost like my head is spinning a bit. Yeah. Can I open my eyes?
I would say stay with it for a minute. Is the sensation mostly in your head? Is there any other part of your body?
It's in my head.
So I would feel into it a bit and kind of stay with the dizziness instead of trying to resist it or change it in any way. Just notice how it's shifting, if it's becoming more prominent.
My head is feeling heavy. It's almost as if everything is in my head. The rest of my body is lighter, but my head is heavy.
If you were to breathe into that sensation and inquire, what do you think it's telling you?
That's so interesting. It's not a good place. The feeling I'm having is almost making me sad, but it's all in my head.
So I would say that it's all in my head, and the not a good place are more thoughts. But the feeling, what you're describing, is sadness.
Physical manifestation of it is like heavy, spinning, dizzy. That's the physical part of it.
What would you say its purpose is?
I couldn't tell you. Sahar, this is so incredible because I could feel it in one part of my body. Like I did not feel it anywhere else. And that's probably indicative of something. But this is, oh my gosh, it's giving me goosebumps.
It's always vulnerable to do it, like in this type of a space.
You mind if we make one more stop before heading back? I need to run a Target.
100%. Let's RTT. You thinking of stuff for the dorm?
Yeah, my mom gave me some good tips on must-have essentials. We for sure need underbed storage, handheld iron for wrinkles, maybe even a mini Keurig for Mondays. Am I right?
All right, bet. Because I was already thinking about keeping my clothes looking fresh at college, so you better be sharing that.
Of course, man. Whatever I get on this run is yours too.
Twin.
But for real, let's go before they close.
Find everything you need for college at Target.
This episode is brought to you by Perfect Bistro Cat Food. Hey guys, today I'm interviewing my cat about his Perfect Bistro food. Percy, you seem to be a big Perfect Bistro fan. Care to comment? Totally. What do you like about it? You love the high quality ingredients? And the delicious flavors, of course. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Listen to Percy, guys. Visit perfectbistro.com to try it for your cat.
Let me ask you this. From a client to a healer, why?
I think in so many traditions, we are taught or told that healing, doing therapy, talking about ourselves and going into ourselves is seen as a selfish act, which I feel like is so completely off track. Like, I just think it's so wrong in the sense that I genuinely, like, deep in the depths of my heart, believe that healing work is collective, regardless of how you're doing it. Like, you working on yourself is inherently affecting every single person in the world because it's a ripple effect. It affects the people you work with. It affects your family. It affects your friends. And it literally just ripples outward. And I've experienced that in my own process of healing, where when I started going to therapy, all the conversations I was having with my parents and my brother and my extended family, and how much my own experience was able to unlock these things for my family as well. I think it's like the most selfless thing that you could do for the world is to work on yourself.
And give back, because that's what you're doing now, right? As a healer, are you still training or are you a trained healer now?
I think for most people in this work, I feel like it's a never-ending training. You know, I think there's one of those things where I am certified, but there is so much more that I want to continue to learn and I will continue to be doing. So right now, I'm focused on internal family systems, somatic work, and then a lot of like creative ritual. So there's a lot of stuff within those two modalities that pulls in a lot of creativity. And then even as I'm working with clients, I'm also doing my own healing work because there's something really beautiful about the relationship with client, which I think is sometimes kept quiet. I think in the traditional psychological sphere, there's so much separation between like the practitioners and the people who are getting the help, which I don't like to abide by. I think when you're with clients, obviously there is a big separation. But I think there's something about the type of work that I do that actually has to take into account the humanity of everybody involved and the fact that we are all constantly impacting each other and affecting each other.
Your practice, it's called Soma Sahar. It has your name in it. Is there a reason? Is there a story behind it?
There is. So Soma, I think, is about the body, as some may know. And Sahar, the meaning of Sahar is dawn, or like the awakening of the world. It's basically when everybody wakes up. Soma Sahar is about the awakening of the body, which is really the center point of the work that I'm doing with clients. That it actually took a very long time for me to get to that phrase. I think it was only earlier this year that I was like, oh, that's what I should call it, because it feels so me, but also so grounded in the service that I'm able to offer other people.
What have you exhaled through learning this as a healer and as a client?
The first word that came to mind was perfectionism.
Ah,
I would say perfectionism and certainty, or like a grasp for certainty and control, are two of the things that have been the biggest exhales, which are, again, their process. I think it's one of those moments where you think you've exhaled it and then you get pulled back in. And then you exhale it again.
Yeah.
And then you get pulled back in. Yeah.
You know, to me, it's like over the years and having been in therapy for so long, as you said, I do have the language to describe my feelings. But as you said, people who are struggling, who can really articulate their trauma, they're still struggling. What you're trying to do through somatic healing is make that connection more visible where they're feeling it in their bodies and then help them release it, right? Is that the idea?
I would say it's more about moving with the rhythm of it rather than releasing it.
Oh, okay. Releasing it is not the end goal.
I think there are releases that happen. I think the goal is to help people understand how to be with an emotion as it comes, rather than using whatever tools they have built for themselves.
So let's not fix ourselves. Let's experience what we are feeling and then let it heal on its own.
Yes. And usually the experience of it is the thing that makes it lighter.
Huh.
And everybody's are so different.
I've seen your growth and I've seen how you've grown in the last 7 years. You've seen Immigrantly's growth. And this is homecoming, hopefully for you in some ways. It's such an emotional moment for me to talk to you and almost map out your journey alongside Immigrantly's. In the end, I will ask you the same question I asked you 7 years ago. If you were to define the United States of America in a word or a sentence, how would you do that? Let's do it in the context of somatic healing. Let's contextualize it in this practice. Let's root it in this practice.
I think it's a deconstruction of self right now. Deconstruction of our own internal identity. I would say that's maybe where we are right now.
Where do you see America? Processing its trauma?
The image that's coming to me is the decomposition that happens when you're inside the cocoon. Like, people talk about the caterpillar, the cocoon, and the butterfly, but they don't talk about the state that the creature is in when it's in the cocoon, which is goop. It's literally decomposed. So I would say in an archetypal framing, it is literally in the goop of that. And it's trying to figure out how to rebuild and what it means to rebuild. What does it mean to be American now, given there's abundant education on the realities of the history? So how do we move forward from here? How do we rebuild our own sense of self? And I'm, a relenting optimist, where I think after that decomposition comes a renaissance. There comes this massive coming together. And this is more than maybe one sentence, but I do think there is a movement towards the humanism again. There's a movement towards, if we can't depend on the people at the top, how do we depend on each other? And how do we depend on ourselves in turn in order to be able to depend on each other?
I really like that. And yes, let's be hopeful, because there's a lot to be hopeful for, especially in New York. Sahar, where can people find you on Instagram? Is there any other social media handle? Is there a website? Share it with us.
My somatic practice you can find on Instagram at Soma Sahar _. My website is www.somasahar.com.
I love it and I can't wait for our session. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Of course. Thanks, Sadia.
Once I did that teeny tiny session with Sahar on this episode, I've been thinking about that now. It's so weird feeling something so heavy, tense in my mind. It's making me think, what am I holding? What am I storing there? How do I maybe not release it, but at least interact with it, experience it, give it a name? Thank you for being part of this conversation. If you want to listen to the very first episode of Immigrantly, where Sahar and I first talked about her job at PepsiCo and her ambitions almost 7 years ago, you can check it out. Full disclosure, it's pretty raw, and I used the word more times than I have ever used in the last 400 episodes. So be prepared for that. This episode was written and produced by me, Sadia Khan. The editorial review is done by Shay Yu. Our sound designer and editor is Lou Raskin. Immigrantly's theme music is by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Come back next week for another important conversation. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and be kind to others.